All right, let me go ahead and begin introductions. Thanks to Jim DeNova for that kind introduction. My name is Tom Haywood. I have the pleasure of moderating your final panel here today, which is Reflections with Legislative Leadership. We have a most distinguished group of state leaders in front of us. They really need no introduction. Their bios are included in the brochure. I commend them to you to remind all of us of the quality, caliber, and accomplishments of our leaders. We are truly blessed when we think about their abilities and the fact that they are devoting enormous time and effort and talent to the good of the Republic and to good of all of us. So we thank you. We have, I'm going to go down from my left, we have the Speaker of the House of Delegates, Roger Hanshaw, the President of the West Virginia Senate, Mitch Carmichael, the Chairman of the House Education Committee, Joe Ellington, and then former Chairman and member of the Senate Education Committee, Bob Plymel. And I think these people need no introduction to everyone in this room. You know of their accomplishments and leadership in good times and bad. So we're lucky to have them. What we're going to do here in this portion of the program is invite really two questions to each of you. We'll just we'll go down one way and then we'll maybe come back so you can think ahead. The first, really want to invite each of you to react to anything you've heard here today. With a lot of panels, a lot of topics, things you'd like to amplify, clarify, or just your particular reactions to anything. I know, Mr. Speaker, you participated in a panel a little bit ago. And then the second question as we come back is, for the benefit of all of us, is to reflect on where we are and what we might see as we look forward into the 2020 legislative session. So really reactions to anything you've heard, things you'd like to highlight, and then thinking forward with our group. And because you're at my immediate left, Mr. Speaker, I'll call on you first. Reactions and reflections.
Thank you, Tom. I did not get to be on the panel earlier today, but that panel was an entrepreneurship panel, and I just can't resist the opportunity to talk about that for just a moment.
Please do.
Because as I think about, I've said this, I believe, to this very forum before, that the future of our economy in this state is an economy that we create. It's an economy that we have to bring up from the ground here in West Virginia. I know that we read in materials at programs like this often about what we can do to prepare ourselves as a state to be more attractive for external investment, for recruitment of smokestack industries that are going to come save our economy. And I have simply rejected that notion flatly. And I've embraced the idea that we as a state have to create our own economy. And that means creating men and women in the workforce who want to be entrepreneurs, who are empowered with skills to be able to be successful being entrepreneurs, and who want to choose West Virginia as their home and their place of business. When I think about how we structure an education system for this century and the next, it has to be less about what makes us a good employee for someone else, and more about what makes us successful in leadership roles, what makes our students successful leading entities that they design and create for themselves. The last panel that I had the chance to hear a moment ago about dual enrollment courses plays a role in that. So I come from Clay County. I live in Clay County, West Virginia. My wife teaches American history at Clay County High School, and it is astounding to me the number of students who qualify in our school as homeless. So I saw data that my wife presented the other day that, according to some definition that we as the state of West Virginia embrace, over 50% of the students at Clay County High School qualify as homeless. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. And my background, of course, in part is in agriculture, and it's often said that rich people have many problems, but hungry people have one. That's where we are. That's where we are if 60% of our student population qualifies as homeless. We have a lot of things to worry about. Chief among them is, how do we make sure those students come to school each morning prepared to become leaders?
Thank you. So entrepreneurship and the socioeconomic status and realities facing our students. Mr. President.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you this afternoon. And I want to just reflect on, I was here at the beginning of the conference this morning, and I heard Brian Nolan. And he was the chancellor, at one time. And then as I had to leave, go to some other meetings and so forth, and I heard our new chancellor, Sarah Tucker. And I think that linkage is instructive for me. In Tennessee, that was the genesis of Senate Bill 1. frankly, where they're able to provide community and technical college education at a zero cost to not just students, but to citizens. And one of the biggest impediments to growth that we have in our state from an economic perspective is the low workforce participation rate. And when we can provide educational opportunities at from a certification degree or an associate's level degree to those who are unable to participate in the workforce in a meaningful way, that is a game-changing revolution in our state. And to have that, to see, Tom, frankly, the genesis of that idea from Tennessee and to see it being carried out by Sarah is very rewarding for the people in this room, I think. And it should be very inspiring, really, to look at and see how quickly we can implement a program. And Sarah's talked about how incredibly successful that's been just since June 30th. And how many people that otherwise wouldn't have aspired to an associate degree or some certification is really a game changer for our state. And so that's the piece that I'll take away from this most prominently, is that evolution of that idea so quickly, and seeing how the people in this room were able to bring it forth and make it happen. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So thinking about Senate Bill 1, a passion of yours for quite some time, and the evolution of issues, and as we think about cross-state exchange of ideas and what was maybe not possible a few years ago becomes possible. So thinking about those possibilities and really education in the reach of all. Chairman Ellington.
I thought all of the presentations were very good. Gives me a lot of optimism for the future for our state, because we do have a lot of concerns. There's been a lot of questions from the legislature as far as how do we do things. Obviously, there's millions of different topics that we could address, and we have limited finances to do that. Dual credit, that was one of the things that I was looking at. How do you get them to do dual credit? How do you get institutions to do that? I mean, we've been talking about funding for higher education, and, community technical colleges. I think having different benchmarks in there that say we would like to direct you in that direction. Obviously, funding drives a lot of the things, a lot of behavior in the state. So that's one way, but we have to be careful about the negative consequences of how we do that. One thing that was mentioned last night, Dr. Moore mentioned about getting into the middle and high school students for workforce. Middle school is something that I've heard from a number of educators, from my superintendents from high school, saying that they'd like to get those kids into VOTEC and other, not only shop type things, but hands-on activities, sort of like what we saw today with the IT stuff. The other thing that I have is, I find that in the legislature, funding is always something, everyone that says we need more, give us more. And it never ends. We've put so much money into education and into any other agencies. But one of the things I've found in the legislature is we have these silos that they don't seem to work together many times. And so we duplicate a lot of services, which takes a lot of funds, and we seem to continually keep adding to it and adding new things. When I was at NCSL recently this year, I talked with a number of legislatures around the country and asked them, how do you guys deal with these problems? And they talked about blended programs. Instead of just giving money toward each agency, say, you two are going to work together. We're going to fund this project. You accomplish it, and then we'll do it. That may be a way that we do things like the dual credit, stuff like that. But those are areas that I'm looking at.
That's terrific. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So thinking of the importance of middle school, it seems that we are collectively developing that consciousness at a much higher level, the manufacturers and many others thinking about reaching into that age, and that's something of interest to you. And then funding flexibility is what I've heard, really breaking down some of those silos and looking at blended programs. Blended programs, great. Senator Plymel.
Well, Tom, I'm going to be very interested to hear how you summarize what I say. You know, it's interesting, having been in the legislature for 27 years, I'll start my 28th. I've seen a lot of things, and, you know, I've been on the Education Committee for all 27 of those years, and 12 of those as a chair. And, you know, we talk about different things. You know, we passed a performance-based funding for higher education that we were just going to do as a pilot project, but we couldn't, because of the resistance from the institutions, ever pass the pilot project. So, you know, you start talking about some of the things that are tough and hard. You do this, but you can't implement it because the institutions, you know, rally against you. We talk about one of the real positive things that came out of here that no one really seemed to hear, I think, is early childhood education. You go back for the last 20 years and see what we've done, and Hank, we went through a lot of these things together in getting the formula, the school aid formula that really paid for early childhood, and see where we're a leader, but we're now stagnant because we're not moving further. And one of those things that we need to be looking at is the 3-year-olds. We can do the 3-year-olds, and it's, once again, this is not something that's mandated. It's one that parents choose. You can reach a goal. You can do it without any extra funding because you can capture the loss of what you're having in the school aid formula to do the 3-year-olds. But if you want to address the opioid crisis and you want to look at Head Start, you put those kids in Head Start and they're out of the situations where they are and they're into a learning environment. So the other thing is the silos that I saw. There's still the silos present. They were here today. You have teacher preparation programs talking about teacher preparation and where they're going, but to be very honest with you, we're only about 20% where we need to be in teaching the teachers of the future, because we're not do digital learning. You have the I Center, you have the Encova Center that was at Marshall and WU. They talked about the things that they're doing, but how do you take the things that they're doing and make sure those are in the teacher preparation programs so you're engaging the students on a digital platform? We're not doing that. So we are still siloing whether we think it or not. If you go look at the strengthening the economic resilience in Appalachia, that's West Virginia, since we're the only state totally in the Appalachian region, one of the first things they say is invest in education, technology, infrastructure, and broadband. I give this last 3 or 4 years of the legislature an A in addressing broadband, and I can point that to a couple individuals. And the Speaker is one of those. And I also will tell you the President. The President took a hard hit on this when we were going through this in doing the right thing. But we've moved broadband and addressing broadband very, very clearly. But we haven't done the real tough one. And that's the E-rate side of this. You heard today about how they're using E-rate to build, you know, your broadband in the areas. And you go look at where we are falling short. We're not using E-rate to the fullest advantage that we can to build broadband, and that does your digital platforms for your learning. You go look at education. Education uses more broadband than any entity in the country. Next is healthcare, and then business falls behind that before it goes to individuals. But if you look at what we can do, we really have the platform, and the legislature's really made great strides in this. But if we can use E-rate to be able to build into our rural areas, you will get the digital platforms for educational learning that you need.
Thank you very much, Senator. So resistance and change, siloing of programs, not just funding streams, still a challenge. Some successes to celebrate. Early childhood learning, need to still do more. We can do more. Broadband, great success, more opportunity, more challenge there. So now let's look forward now. Let's look through the forward lens. Senator Plum will come right back down the other way. 2020 legislative session, what do you see coming? What are you trying to advance?
Well, I think I already mentioned one thing. I think the 3-year-olds in early childhood, that's something that is nothing that is partisan whatsoever. If you look at the nation right now, The nation is led by the business groups who are saying this is something that is needed. When I was in Japan recently, you see how they engage that, and that's a real great platform from their business standpoint. It's something that we really need to look at. I think that addressing the E-rate situation and trying to make it a more seamless situation to where, look, I represent one of the counties that pays the highest E-rates in the state. I want to find a solution for Wayne County. I want to find a solution for that where we have the two providers not talking to each other and not providing the services, and the services are 3 times as much as what most other counties pay. I owe that to the citizens that I represent to be able to do that. On the teacher preparation programs, this is a responsibility of the state board, and I put it on the state board. Be serious about it. Look at the Finland model. Look at what they did. They used to have 9 teacher preparation programs. They took it down to 5. And you can say, that's a country, that's not a state. 4 million people. Kentucky has 4.2 million. What's the difference between that and a state? It's the same type of thing. We have to be serious about teacher preparation. We're not getting what we need, and we're not providing that in the classrooms of the future. So if you want the I-Center, if you want the Encova Center, if you want things like that for your children, and we have to have those, we have to have that. And investing in the workforce side of it, I'm really strong. I think what the Senate President said in Senate Bill 1, obviously I was a strong supporter of that. I think that that's very good. We've got to find other ways to be able to look at apprenticeships and different things like that. And the final thing that I would say is let's not wait to do what Virginia's had to do recently. Virginia, in order to get Amazon in, had to run a bill and put about $11 to $12 million in to structure into higher education to be able to have Amazon to have the workforce of the future. Businesses are going and doing it themselves. They will educate their own people, and that's already being done throughout the country right now, unless we figure out how to bring the new technologies into the classroom and into our learning.
Thank you, Senator. So E-rate, teacher prep, responsibility of the board, workforce, continued focus on workforce beyond Senate Bill 1. How do we continue to do that? And then thinking about new technology and making sure as we live in this rapidly evolving world of technology, how that translates into the classroom and education. Chairman Ellington.
Well, the factors that I had mentioned earlier, expanding on each of those, a funding formula for higher ed is going to be something we need to really work on. They've got hit the past few years and took a pretty good hit. We need to stabilize that and have a pretty good model on how to do that in the future and something objective rather than just very subjective on things. So that, to me, is one of probably the biggest priorities that we're going to have in this session. As far as retention and recruitment of educators, I think we do need to make some changes to that. We've heard some of that today. That's going to be a tough battle because there's going to be a lot of pushback. Some powers that be like to keep the same thing, but we do need to address those needs. We're scaring away new people. Low man on the totem pole, and we're trying to recruit these people, and we need to be able to keep them. We need to be able to be competitive with our surrounding states. So, when they go through the RIF process, everything's done by the end of June, is my understanding. We need to get these people back in January, February, April, March, when they're getting ready to graduate. So that's something I personally would like to pursue. I may take a pretty good hit on it, but I think we need to really do that. School nurses is another thing I've been hearing a lot about from various institutions. So looking at that, and that's one of those potentially blended programs with DHHR and DEA. Infrastructure of our institutions. I've had some discussions with Dr. Tucker about this too. funding for that, we have to address that. It's a recurring thing. I think infrastructure through our whole state, whether it be information technology, computer systems, whether it be physical structures, things like that, those are all things I think we need to be looking at too and addressing a stable funding for that and take care of those parts. And the other thing was, one of the things I heard from in the K-12 part, smaller class sizes. And I was looking at that and I'm like, well, yeah, it makes sense. Let's have smaller class sizes. You can have better one-on-one instruction with the students. And the problem I see is we already have a deficit of 700 positions in teaching. Where are you going to get the extra ones? I think there was an estimate that if we drop the class size down from 25 to 20, that adds another 700 type teachers and probably another 300 service personnel as far as aides. The other part then I look at is, well, the physical structure. How many classrooms do these institutions have that they can put those extra classes in? So those are things I'm trying to look at. How can we solve that problem? But how do we have those barriers that we're going to have to address too? So, but those are just some of the things on my mind.
That's great. That's it. So I heard several things, stabilizing the funding formula as well as trying to create more objective standards. Retention and recruitment of educators, infrastructure broadly speaking, and the nurses, the issue of school nurses, blended programs. So the concept of blended comes up yet again, and a willingness from you and many others to take on battles, it sounds like. So thank you for your leadership in taking those on. Mr. President.
Well, thank you. First, I want to say that I think in all the contentiousness over the last several years about education, one of the things that impressed me just sitting on this panel at this moment is how, like Senator Plummer, who's on the other side of the aisle, but he is such a respected and admired member of the education community, and we look to him for so much guidance as it relates to education. So I think it may be comforting for you to know that in spite of what maybe gets reported or you see all the outgrowth of or the outpouring of emotion around this issue of education, that there are bipartisan solutions that are being brought forth and incorporated in the ideas that are trying to move West Virginia forward in terms of our education. Now, looking forward, I'm looking forward to a calm year as it relates to education. I mean, that's not to say that that we won't push the envelope as we have in the past, but because we will not rest until we are first. There's no reason this state can't be first. We're 1.8 million people. We should be able to turn this, as Senator Plum was talking about, cities, nations can do it. We, of 1.8 million people, can turn this. And we have to be inspired to do it because it is our children, it's their future, it's enlightening for the rest of their lives. And we should not be satisfied with a situation in which we find these test data, we'll read these litany of excuses as to why we don't perform at the top levels. But at the end of the day, this is the hand we're dealt. We have to make it work. And we will make it work. We will be the best. And there's ways to do it. We're finding those ways to do it. And if it requires some change and some consternation, a little bit of upset, hurt feelings, it's worth the effort and it's worth the fight. And so the things that I see us really pursuing, and it relates to the workforce preparation and so forth, is driving these VOTEC classes and so forth down lower into the maybe junior high, high school levels, making sure that you have the flexibility to implement those programs on teacher training programs and other things, that we don't mandate it, but we provide you the flexibility to do that. And so often when we hear of a solution or an idea, we want it to be implemented at the state level. It may be a great idea, but where should it germinate from? What would be the genesis of that idea? Where should it be implemented? We want you to have the flexibility to do it at your institutional level or at the local community level. And so those are the things that we're trying to achieve from a long-term goal perspective. But, frankly, we've had a lot of, issues the last several years around education, and we need to let that settle in and try to see the results of those Herculean efforts that we put forth over the past several years.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So an acknowledgement, we have witnessed and all been caught up in the clashes, but an acknowledgement of the strong bipartisan efforts on so many issues that matter, and a shout out to that. Thank you for that. Thanks to all of you. A suggestion that maybe we can take a little bit of a breather on major initiatives in this session and let some of these initiatives that we have struck out on in recent years take root and infiltrate the system. Still, though, we will not rest until we are the best. Workforce preparation, still focused on that. And so we look forward to that session where maybe we take a little bit of a breather from the big issues and work on again, another very common theme here is driving younger, earlier grades to younger folks across programs, across initiatives, seeing that that's going to be critical to our ongoing long-term success. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Tom. To begin with, I observed during the panel that I was 11 when Senator Plima was elected first to the legislature.
You should listen to me more often.
Yes, I did. And I point that out only because it needs to be remembered that we have, at least in the House, we have a relatively young legislature. We have a growing number of men and women who have chosen to come to public service at a young age. As I stand at the podium from time to time and look around our chamber, and I will very soon be 40, and I am nowhere close to the youngest member of our House now. And that's an exciting thing for our state. That's an exciting thing for West Virginia, because what it does is bring to our chamber, to our legislature, some perspectives and ideas that maybe haven't been there in the same way that they are today. So I saw my wife, I hate to keep referring to my wife, but she is a public school teacher and shows me things from her classroom and her experience often, just like we do with all of our family members. And she had recently shown me a picture of a side-by-side comparison of a classroom from 18 whatever and a classroom of today. And at the secondary level, at the high school level, they looked an awful lot alike. And that was a pretty stark comparison, because the lower we go in grades, it seems, the more embracing we are of technology in the classroom, of different kinds of teaching methods, of a willingness to try something different in instructional methods. But the closer we get to the workforce, in other words, the older students get, the closer we get to the workforce, the more we look like the past. And that hadn't hit home to me until I saw that picture. The closer we get to putting someone in the workforce, the closer we put them to the past. So one of the things that is pretty important to me is making sure that students don't get shoehorned into a place that isn't right for them. So I loved college, loved everything about it. Would go back to college tomorrow if my wife would let me. Loved it. But it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. And I think we often do students a disservice by propagating the notion that that's the only path to career success in society. So just this morning, for example, in the Capitol, we had a significant meeting on occupational licensing reform and lowering the barriers to job entry for those students who want to leave high school and want to enter the workforce and want to become participating members of the economy immediately. So making sure that we maximize the number of opportunities for students to leave high school programs with some kind of employable certification, if they choose to do so, is important to us. And that's one of the things that we've begun to talk about, and one of the things we've begun to look seriously at. Delegate Ellington makes the absolutely correct point that we need a funding formula for the higher education institutions. He and Vice Chairman Higginbotham in the back have already begun working with all of the four-year and to some extent two-year institutions in the state to sort of to take the subjectivity out of how we fund higher education in the state. The budget for it would be unheard of for any county public school system to think that their state allocation would be different depending upon who the chairman of the House Finance Committee was. But that is not at all unheard of for higher education institutions, and that's sad. And we've let that happen over the course of time here in our state, and we can't really operate like that any longer. So we know that creation of a funding formula, a proper funding formula for the higher education institutions in our state has to be a priority. We have to reward institutions which have different kinds of missions. We have to make sure that institutions which are primarily chartered to be teaching institutions get rewarded when they teach well. Conversely, we have to make sure that our research institutions are properly rewarded when they perform their function well, which is not always the same as our four-year institutions. And lastly, Tom, I'll say that one of the things that we have talked a lot about at the level of the members of the House recently is that we need to be careful about how many programs we fund in any particular area. And this isn't unique to public education. It cuts across the entire spectrum of what we fund as a government. Are we funding too many programs in any particular area? Choose your favorite area of public policy and ask yourselves how many programs are funded in part by the government to address that need. And are we funding too many? And I think the answer to that question, if we're serious with ourselves, is often yes. So we've committed to make a fairly sustained effort this year at looking more closely at what the actual results being achieved by programs are and double down on some of the programs that are working well and just simply stop funding those programs that aren't working at all. And that's hard. You know, we all like to say we need as many people as we can out there doing as much good work as possible, but sometimes achieving the best result means making a tough choice, and that means cutting funding entirely for some programs in order to fund those which are doing the best work more fully.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the youngest member of the panel observes that the closer we get to workforce and higher education, the more we look like we did 100 years ago. So interesting really visual that creates, as well as the thought paradigm to think about, and the notion of differentiation as we think about careers and opportunities, really looking at that, beginning to think more explicitly about that. The continued notion of flexibility, breaking down silos, looking at funding, and focus on what works, but look at, do we have too many programs? And we're going to continue to winnow, focus on what works, and look for blending and flexibility. I hear that. Please join me in giving a big round of applause to all of our panelists. Thanks for their leadership and for being here today.